open.
Which document are we on? MSMA? Are we on the,
Right.
We'd like to call this meeting to order, please. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming. The board is just returning to open session after a brief executive session earlier this evening in which we sought advice of counsel on a matter that will appear in the latter part of the agenda under new business, so we'll discuss that when we get to the new business section. That brings us to the public comment section of our agenda. We do have a person who has signed up to speak. Mr. Bailey, if you wouldn't mind coming down to the microphone, please start your remarks by stating your name and the town in which you live. Thank you.
Good evening. Burnell Bailey, South Berwick. I am here to address my concerns regarding the SAD 35 program titled Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as presented in the district's website. Of particular concern is a book that is a pillar of that program, stamped Racism, Anti-Racism, and You by Reynolds and Kendi. By any reasonable standard of academic analysis, Stamped is replete with inaccuracies, misrepresentations, and outright falsehoods. I would describe it as someone using selective facts in a labored effort to prove a conclusion, some of it being akin to driving a square peg into a round hole. Concerning falsehoods, here are two examples. First, on page 7, they claim the first racists in history appeared in white Europe, Portugal, in the 15th century, ignoring thousands of years of history before that. Second, on page 47, the authors, in speaking of the rationale for the American Revolution, state that, quote, in order for America to feel comfortable with continuing slavery, they had to get away from, break free of, Britain once and for all. No, the reasons are outlined in detail in the Declaration of Independence. Additionally, it also points out other seeds of nonsense. Here are two examples. On page 24, again, trying to make something racist, they come out with this statement, quote, you know the old saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get racist, unquote. It's absolute nonsense cloaked in humor. On page 237 is a discussion about the effect of Hurricane Katrina on black communities. They state, without any other justification, quote, it was rumored, mind you, that the Bush administration directed FEMA to delay its response in order to amplify the destructive reward for those who would benefit. This is just plain irresponsible. So basically, this book should, in the least, be viewed with a huge dose of skepticism. I believe we can do better for our students. Don't you? Now, one of your members has stated, quote, "Stamped is an example, is one very literal, diverse perspective. By the same token, I have no doubt that our 8th grade curriculum includes many other perspectives as well." Okay, fine. Let's run with that. I request to see the proof of the presentations of these other perspectives. Please show me where the counter information to Stamped is covered and what it is. For instance, do you cover present-day slavery and who the perpetrators are? Also, what is the reason for this DEI training? Your DEI presentation references a contract with the Mars Hill Group. What was the process used to choose this book or this contractor? What did the contract cost? Did you purchase the book Stamped for use in this district? How many did you buy? What was the cost? To whom were they given? If our district or the state did not pay for any of these costs above, who paid for it? Let me close with a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn: "Live not by lies." I have a copy of the questions, and I will leave them with the staff, Mr. Cavalier.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Bailey, is your email going to be there on that document as well?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. That brings us to the report of the secretary. May I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of our last meeting?
I move, go ahead.
I move we approve the minutes of the regular meeting of Wednesday, January 19th, 2022.
I'll second, Jen.
Jen, thank you.
I just had a couple spots.
Yeah, me too.
Under the first paragraph, the 5th line down, possible but understand the safety is an issue, maybe that safety is an issue. And then 2 lines down after that, he reported he received A, responses
Yeah.
to his letter. And then under 3 in the 2nd line, service committee has held 2 of the meetings.
Yeah, and also in number 2, it says, which included pool testing, update on masking. Like it should say, it should be a comma or an and or something. They're little things.
Yeah.
Anybody find anything else? Okay. Any other comments or questions? All in favor? That's 5-0. Thank you. That brings us to the report of the chair. I have the single item that our next town officials meeting is scheduled for February 9th. It will be at 9:30. It will be virtual. As we have done for the past several, if those of you who wish to attend would let me know, I'll coordinate that in a couple of days before the meeting so that we make sure we only have 3 of us there.
Can I add a couple of pieces of information
Sure.
to this? I met with both the town manager from LA and South Berwick today. It was a good conversation, really focusing on, where the relationship began, the purpose of our meetings, and then the commitment to kind of go forward with that. Both town managers were very much in support of going forward with it. They had asked, and I told them that I would talk to you about it this evening, about a willingness to shoot for March to be able to start meeting in person again. I'm not sure how people feel about that. Certainly March or April, I just wanted to bring it up to the board. I thought that, we had talked about kind of being remote, but we were going to assess at this meeting to kind of figure out what our next steps were beyond February. I think even if we do go in person, I think having the remote option was something we want to be able to still include people who may not be able to get out and make the travel time to be, there. So, it's just to give people some flexibility. Don't need an answer right now, but it's something that maybe amongst all of you want to think about.
Yep.
We have some time. We'll still be remote on the 9th. It may make a little bit more sense to kind of see where the numbers are at that point in time.
Sure.
But at the same time, certainly, I always want to share what the will of the board is.
I guess my question would be what would be the benefits of meeting face to face at this time?
I think that was a great question. So one of the things that we talked about, for instance, is that, both of the new town managers have never been to our buildings. So have the opportunity to see what the schools may look like, maybe meet in a school when they're with us one time, or they haven't been to each other's offices. And so trying to be able to, to share a bit more of who we are. That was really what kind of came up today, the opportunity, they both are brand new. And so, again, it's totally up to the will of the board. I personally think that as long as we keep meeting, it doesn't really matter how we do it. I don't necessarily know that if there's something that we go into a great deal of depth with that might be better to be in person, we can certainly do that, but I also don't think it necessarily is a game changer either way. And so it's really up to all of you as you kind of start to consider that. The magic number, obviously, is we cannot have more than 3 board members attend on our end on any of those meetings. So,
Sure.
So I just want to share the news that I did meet with them.
Okay, yep. Great, thank you. That brings us to the report of the superintendent.
Not a lack of things to talk about tonight. First of all, I wanted to share with you that Mr. Bourbon will be here tonight, and Mr. Bourbon has done a great deal of work around district sustainability. And so he has a nice presentation he's put together that he was going to share with you this evening. So, Mr. Bourbon, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for having me come in tonight. Appreciate it very much. Nice to get back together with some of my colleagues here in the stands before the meeting. So I did provide a copy of the report that I'm going to kind of not really read from, but I'm going to reference as I go through, talking a little bit about some of the sustainability practices in the district. So I'll be referencing that, but certainly if there are any questions that come up at any point, let me know. The other thing that I don't really want to do, however, as Mr. Cavalier just said, the will of the board will direct me exactly how I'll proceed. I won't read every aspect of what's going on in all of the schools, but I tried to really provide you a comprehensive look at what is going on in our school buildings in terms of currently, and then what each one of the principals and head custodians are kind of working on with their schools, to plan for the future a little bit. So I provided in this packet a little bit of information about Triano. They're our waste service provider in terms of what they take away from our schools all the time. Sometimes we just look at that as rubbish removal from the schools, but in fact we are doing some recycling through the services through Triano. We are currently recycling all of our waste copy paper that we pull out of the buildings, and I've provided some information in there in terms of how many of those, we call them totes, are picked up on a weekly basis, and that right there is basically just the excess or misprinted or throwaway copy paper that we use in our buildings. And also we are recycling cardboard, and so those are the things that we're paying to get rid of, but those are items that are being recycled. So approximately 20 tons of cardboard a year is getting recycled. So we're pulling that from the general rubbish and the general trash in our schools, and that is actually used as I guess a commodity out there. That probably gets sold at some point in time, and it does in fact get reused, just as well as the 64 tons of copy paper. And that's not strictly just copy paper, blank sheets and that type of thing. Those are copies of paper that are no longer used. Maybe somebody cleans a file out or something like that, and we do have collection bins in all of the classrooms, and that paper does get collected up. But in fact, it does get collected separate from general rubbish, and that actually goes into a recycling effort. I do go on to share with you some information in terms of what we have for collection containers at every one of the school buildings, so you can peruse that information at your leisure. And then I do try to provide some information in terms of what are the recycling and green practices at each one of the schools. In addition to that, I've also provided some information in terms of what some of the schools are talking about with some of their clubs and organizations to make their school building a better recycler and more green, at least in thinking, you know what I mean, and hopefully in action as well. So I don't know if there's any questions from anybody about that with regard to the information that I've shared. I do have one other piece that I'm going to share information about, and that will be something about a sustainability practice.
One question, in terms of the bins in each of the classroom, I mean, is it a structured system where, you know, on certain days that they're emptied, or is it just the will of whoever the classroom teacher is?
I would say, Heather, I would probably defer, I'll whisper it, the principals will answer that for you.
Right.
No, but they can answer it if you want. I mean, having been a principal, I know. I mean, it really is to the will and you know, of the classroom teacher. But I would say this, Heather, really is that I envision recycling as being a practice that I would love to see our children be the initiators in.
Yeah.
And they're the ones who really are the sustainability people. And once they start making sure their paper goes in the right container, their aluminum and plastic gets put away, as we move forward and start to look at waste food types of things, you know what I mean, separating food from paper and that type of thing, when they're doing it, that's when I know that we've won and we can really use the word sustainability. So
Absolutely.
And I would say,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
I would say, Tony, that there is not a structure set in the district right now. It's something that we have to create. I think certain buildings are ahead of other buildings.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to start to reprioritize that as we kind of come out of the pandemic. Like, for instance, at the high school, there's a pretty comprehensive list of things that are in the works. We need to get back to where we were pre-pandemic. So
Yeah.
that's part of our goal as we kind of start to have these conversations.
Excellent. You know, I encourage you all to think about, you know, creating that student buy-in by either doing, you know, school-based special events, whether it's during the hack block in the high school level or in a special assembly, but figure out, you know, some sort of something special that really grabs the students' attention and to start getting that buy-in, because then it will be passed on from level to level. As new kids come in, the older ones will train the little ones, and
Heather, I'd give an example of something, and I'm going to speak a little bit about my mentor, and that's Jerry Burnell. And I'm not even going to ask his permission to say this, but to your point, instead of using the styrofoam cups for their cocoa day, they're using ceramic, and that's a real experience. That's an actionable step right there for kids to understand that no longer are we taking 5 bags of trash out at the end of the breakfast session. We're washing the ceramic mugs, and they come back and they reuse them. And day after day, that adds up. And that's happening in all of our school buildings, you know, that they are doing some of those practices right there. And there is a realization of the efforts, you know what I mean, of students doing stuff like that. So, sorry about that, Jerry.
no, that's good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
He said he wants a word outside after, but that's okay. The next point probably I'd move right on to, folks, would be just a discussion about LED lighting. If you look into our ceilings now, we do have, you know, spotty LED upgrades that we've moved into as we've considered a different lighting option. And generally, when we're looking at LED lighting versus incandescent or halogen lighting, LED really, it is the only way to go. On the last page of my presentation, I provided some pros and cons, and that's probably where I'll just spend a couple of minutes, if you don't mind. It's been quite interesting for me to look into, and it's really eye-opening when you start to look at the cost comparisons. But LED lighting, some of the pros of that are it draws a fraction of the power, you know what I mean, compared to the traditional incandescent lighting. It's about a 75% savings in terms of the draw for power to light up your building when you move to LED lighting. The payback on investments begins immediately because if you know electricity is charged or we have to pay for the wattage, it's the kilowatt hours that accumulate. The less watts that we use, the less our overall bill is going to be. And immediately when you move from incandescent lighting to LED lighting, you go to a fraction, basically 1/5 of the required wattage to power the same lighting. So that's interesting. LED lighting is more efficient, less is more, and is a significantly better form of light. The lumens that LED lighting actually puts out can be very, very direct. It isn't just a general spray of light. You can direct it, and it's a lot more controllable light. Lighting does not require ballast. If anybody's familiar with that, LED lighting does not require that. Our fluorescent lights currently do. What that right there is, it's a calibration of the amount of electricity that goes into the lights. It's very, very expensive. Every one of the light fixtures has one, and they regularly will burn out. And they burn out because if it doesn't have the full capacity of light bulbs working, it's overworking, it overheats, and then it stops working. So not only do we have to replace the ballast at about $25 each, and if you go around and take a look at each fixture in our building, there is one ballast in each. We also have to bring an electrician in, because that is an electrical cost, and we don't do that. Not even in facilities do we do that. That takes a master electrician to be able to work on that. So
And that is not $25 each.
that is not $25 each.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the going rate. Significant efficiency main available for people who go out there, and there is some criteria that you have to meet with regard to being able to have a project that will do that, but that can be up to 75 cents on a dollar for your materials anyway, and it could be more. Just so that you do know, 1 watt of LED light, 1 watt of LED light equals 100 lumens. 1 watt of incandescent light is 50 lumens, so that's twice the amount. So when you're talking about lumens, that's the brightness that a bulb will put out. So 1 watt into an LED puts out twice the amount of what you'd put out in an incandescent light. No life loss resulting from power on and off when you're working with LD versus when you're working with incandescent and halogen lights. Every single time you turn an incandescent or halogen light on, you're taking away from the life of that, and you haven't even used it yet. But that's just to be able to power it up and then power it down. So you lose a significant amount of your life from your lights. And just another fact about LED lighting is a 15-watt LED light will generally go about 50,000 hours of operation versus a 32-watt that will last about 30,000 hours. And so just to put it into an understanding, 32-watt bulbs are what we currently use. That's your current incandescent fluorescent light that we're using in the ceilings in most of our classrooms throughout the district right now. So we would be able to make an adjustment to 15-watt LEDs. And remember always that we're working on lessening the wattage to be able to get that cost in our district down, our electric costs down. And that doesn't go just for lighting. Anytime that you're working with an appliance or anything, anytime that you can reduce the wattage and get the same outcome or the same job done, your electric bill is going to go down. The cons that you'd have to consider are that the initial investment for making a switch over to LED is expensive. There's no question about that. There is a cost to it. The replacement of bulbs are more expensive, but I will tell you this, and it is approximately 2 times the cost for an LED light bulb as it is to an incandescent light. However, it's less than the wattage is about half to less than half when you go to LED. So you make that up immediately. Every time you buy 1 LED light, you've bought really 2 fluorescent lights. Is that making sense?
Yes, absolutely.
I almost confuse myself sometimes. But so that's almost a wash right there, really. And the light is much better. LED lights contain some amount of hazardous materials. Right now, there is a significant amount of hazardous material in fluorescent light tubes, primarily looking at mercury. So we do have to go through a hazardous waste protocol to be able to get rid of those. We would continue to have to do that with the LED lights because there are still traces of
And just to be clear, they're safe to be in schools, but the disposal of them, you just can't
Yep.
throw them in the trash
Yep.
can. So
Right.
I don't want people to walk away thinking that
Yep.
the lights aren't safe. That's
Right,
No,
not
no.
it.
it's the
Yeah.
same as the
I
flood.
thank you for that clarification, John. They're significantly safe, you know what I mean, to be in schools, but to be green, the right thing to do would be to take care of that the right way. And there is a process of incineration that they use to get rid of that material. And again, you know, on the incandescent, or the LED lights, or, excuse me, the incandescences, there is a significant loss of life, you know, when you're using those incandescent and fluorescent tube lights. So, I also provided you just a little brochure there to be able to kind of look through and kind of familiarize yourself a little bit with the terms of wattage and lumens and some of the things that you might need to know what a fluorescent light tube is versus an LED light and those types of things. And I would certainly be happy to answer any questions that I can for you. If you shot me an email or something like that, I'd do that as well. Go ahead, Sue.
Can you tell us more about the efficiency main funds that are available? Like, what are the criteria for that? How long does that program last, et cetera?
I really can't tell you much about that, so I really haven't investigated that much, although I have had several conversations about that with...
Tony, can you share, though, the good example, I think, is that we are talking about, so we had an assessment done 2 years ago prior to COVID about what, you know, where would be the most high-value places to change the lights over, right? And so Efficiency Main, no, sorry, that's not correct. What was the company, Tony, that you're working with right now?
Yeah, it's Efficiency Main.
No, but with the company that
Oh,
does
Affinity.
Affinity Lighting.
Affinity LED lighting.
LED lighting, and they came in and they said, really think about the parking lots, you know, with the outdoor lights, think about the gym, think about the cafeteria, think about the area out here in the main hallway. And so Tony went and got a quote to change over the outside lights. And so it's about a $45,000 roughly
Yep.
job, and Efficiency Main would give us $9,000 of that roughly. Is that right, Tony?
That is exactly right, yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of gives you an idea of just, you know, a
Okay.
way we can leverage that a little bit, and so.
So with the potential of more, really depending on, it really depends on
project.
the scope of your project.
Yeah, I understand that. I
Yeah.
just didn't know what, you know, some of these programs are finite, they go on
Yep.
for so long, and then you know, they're done.
Yeah.
That's what
There
I-
has
yeah.
actually most recently been a fairly significant amount of money, you know, put back into that Efficiency Main program right now. So I would have to say that the iron is pretty hot right now. And if you were to say, Tony, what would your thoughts around the matter be? I would say, you know, we could get after it. I really would say that. You know, you don't have matching monies like that often available to do projects,
Right, well, that
and
was
they'll be
my
expensive
question.
projects.
What's the sense of urgency here? Like, is this something we need to consider right away? Do we have a time frame?
Oh,
So-
there's a time frame. All of the lights are working properly as they should. The problem, Sue, is that the electric bill continues to go up, and
I understand.
this is the only way that we can get a handle on that ever-rising cost of the kilowatt hours.
And so when we do the budget presentation, we're gonna give you, really kind of, here are our things, like our priority list for things that we have to do. And so, this is part of our plan. You know, we will associate a cost with that, but we'll be able to break that down to kind of show, like, this is our hit list of things facilities-wise that we need to get on top of. And so, that could be roofs, that could be parking lots, those, all those types of things. But that we'll, you know, on the, I think it's the 2nd of March, we'll share all that information.
It's timely
It
that we're coming
seems
into a
like
budget cycle.
That three-way energy program that we committed to, too, if we were to, how would this impact our?
Yeah, and so the energy program that we committed to, we will not see anything from that until January of next year. So it's still that lag, and so that's kind of the variable as you're trying to build the budget, like how do you budget for that, so.
Right, because there'd be certain changes if this were to reduce our electrical budget significantly, if we changed to LED lighting, what would that?
That could affect the funds that we receive, but it would also affect the amount we pay, so it may be a wash, so.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
what I was thinking.
That's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
So do you have a quote of the, from each building on how much it would be to
Not each
switch over?
building, I think really, honestly, the focus right now has been at the high school.
Oh,
This is
okay.
where we need to start, and just like, what are those, you know, and the hard part is that if I'm a company, right, I probably don't want you to cherry pick the most high leverage things. I want to do the whole project, and that probably isn't realistic, but let's talk about those high leverage pieces that we can do at each building to be able to save the maximum amount of money. I was told, and you know, Tony will give us some more information about this, you know, when we reach the budget piece, but you know, there's a 2.5 to 3 year approximate payoff the last time that I looked into this, and so that's a pretty good return on your investment. You know, not even to mention the factor on the ballast is, and, you know, and the other factor is we can't really get electricians in the place as often as we'd like to, so.
And what about motion sensors? Do we have those installed in all the classrooms already, or?
They talked about that, and they, you know, and that was something that was kind of more of the whole building project. And so, you know, I'm sure that they'll talk to Tony about that as we get going more along. But that was definitely one of the things, like the back hallways they talked about, where those lights were on all day long, and if we had a motion sensor, it would only turn on when we needed it. There would be a significant savings for that as well, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Feel
And
like
one more-
shopping in frozen foods at Walmart.
Oh, sorry. What was that?
Shopping in the frozen foods at like
Oh, yeah,
Walmart.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
One more question, because I noticed one of the districts that we play sports with, they have electric car chargers at their high schools. And I was wondering if there's any kickback in installing some charging stations for vehicles.
It isn't something that I've looked into. However, I mean, there could be, and if that's something that you folks would like me to look into to find out if that's something when you do an upgrade electrically, I haven't heard that that's the case.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
There was quite a few at this one particular high school, and I thought, oh, there must be some sort of kickback in terms of,
Right.
having those at the high school.
Something, interesting.
So that might be something that we look into if we're going to
Yeah.
do the high school in terms of trying
Electrical
to
as
make it more
Yeah.
energy efficient.
Sure.
And Heather, the other thing, you know, just the fact of, you know, doing something like this is our contribution to the carbon footprint, you know what I mean? So sometimes you look at it and you say, well, I'm gonna save $100 and that type of thing, and I know that that's not how we're all looking at that, but sometimes it's the fact that, you know, you're not taking out 6 bags of trash every day after cocoa, you know what I mean? You know, you've actually reduced the carbon footprint, and not necessarily did you get a couple dollars back from it, but you did the right thing, you know what I mean? And I think that that's somewhat what we're all talking about too. What are those green practices that we can engage in, so.
I'd also be interested in knowing anything about solar panels.
I have looked into a little bit on the solar panel piece to it, and I would tell you that the cost, now there's a time that you would really look at the cost. The cost is significant. It's massive. It really is. It works, but the structures that you have to actually put up, you know what I mean, if you're going to use roofing and that type of thing to be able to reinforce any of your buildings and that type of thing, it's huge. It really is. The other thing about the solar panels is if you don't first go after reducing your wattage draw, you're putting out solar. Let's even say we looked at wind power. You're trying to create a wind power or a solar power that is going to feed the massive wattage giant that we have right now. If you would ask my recommendation, let's lessen that draw on the electricity first, and then we can actually consider a much smaller solar farm or a much smaller windmill, you know what I mean, to generate the power that we would need. That would be the avenue that I would recommend.
One of
or
the
suggest
issues with
for
the
you.
solar is that when we looked into this probably 5 years ago, the structure for a school who overproduced solar power was not the same as a residential. And so it became not advantageous for schools to do it. And so those things may have changed. You know, we certainly can look into that going down the road. But when we looked into it 5 years ago, it just was cost prohibitive because we didn't really reap the benefit of that, so.
Yeah, things have changed, I think, too. I think there's some companies that actually just install their own panels, and then they lower your wattage use or whatever it costs, and then they sell the rest.
Yep.
So, I mean, there's things that have come up recently in the last year or so, even, so.
And we have the competitive energy group that we work with, and
Yeah.
certainly, you know, we can reach out and ask them those questions. 100%. Thank you, Tony.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much.
Just a quick reminder, the second thing on our agenda, we have the joint board meeting with Rollinsford next, in 2 weeks when we meet, and that starts at 5:45. I'm sure that we'll be creating an agenda in the meantime. I did have some feedback from a resident of Rollinsford today who wanted, you know, to be able to come and speak to the board, and what I said is that current policy is that they would, if there was a board-related issue, that would go to their board in Rollinsford, and then they would share that with us, and I said it was great timing because we'd be meeting in 2 weeks with the Rollinsford board, and so to kind of build that train of communication is really important. So, just so you know, this was fascinating. Number 3 is about biogreen opportunity, and so I put a pamphlet in your folders. And so I got a phone call when we were on the tour for the food service RFP. And basically, it was a person calling and saying, look, we have a company that we have built these incredible machines that are really being implemented in some of the biggest places in the country that handles food waste. And we have a small problem, and we wanted to see if the school district would be interested in partnering with us. And the two people who we spoke to were both Marshwood grads. And so what they have are these machines that if you put food waste in, it creates a slurry, and then it dehydrates it, and it creates really a compost on the spot through these machines, really eliminating a lot of the food waste that happens in a setting. Not traditionally designed for a school because it's not the mass amount, but like maybe the Marriott in Washington, D.C. is where they are right now, or Pentagon City in Washington, D.C. So some of these much bigger areas. But their issue is that they were having to buy food waste to be able to test their machines. And they said, hey, look, would there be any appetite on the part of the district if we came and gave you some containers, you could practice your recycling habits, and we could get rid of the food waste for you. That sounds like a win-win for everybody. And so we met yesterday and had some conversations around what that would look like. And really, there's some opportunities maybe down the road for some education for kids. Like, so for instance, for those of us who've had kids that go through the district, as I mentioned before, ORT is always kind of a big term that's used at the Great Works School around Pinkham Notch. And so there's some work that, that they could do in that building around the food waste, where it's really a logical part of the curriculum that they already have created. The high school through the science department, there's some, some incredible science that's being used, and it's right in Stratham, New Hampshire. So there's some ability to do some short-term field trips or short-distance field trips to be able to kind of go see this chemistry in action, really, is what it is. And so I think there's a strong interest on their part to be able to do that. It would take us some time. We have a couple of issues. The first is that we'll get to the number 7 will be some of those bigger issues, but we've got to kind of migrate out of the COVID meal management system, where we've kind of gone in a different direction, and then also just trying to, teach kids and be able to create habits around children of how do we clean up, separate our food waste, so, they can't have paper in it, can't have anything. All food waste is okay. The only thing that the machines can't handle is like some heavy duty beef bones and then oyster shells. So not stuff that we necessarily we would run into on a regular basis. So yeah, that isn't really an issue for us. But I just wanted to share that with the board. Obviously, my thought would be to go forward and be able to see how we can do this as a short-term possibility for us. It's not. I don't think we're necessarily in the place where we want to purchase that machine. That's not what my intent is right now. I think it's more so that we can really kind of create a teachable moment. One of the issues with Mr. Fox that we had is that we used to collect all the food waste, and then what would happen would be is that he would charge us to come pick up the food waste, and then he would sell the food waste. And so really we were getting charged to do this, and so this is a way to do this at no cost to the district. In long term, it will probably keep our trash costs down because the tons that we would be delivering. And more importantly, I think it's also kind of a message for kids around, here's some ways that you can impact the environment here and now in your daily, in your daily life. So.
Yeah, wow. I would love to see the final product
Yeah.
out of the machine.
Yeah, we really,
Yes.
and we can do that.
Eat your vegetables, kids.
Yeah, and we can do that. And so, the gentleman who I worked with is literally right across the street. Lisa lives, works right down the hallway from them. And so, someone who's really excited about the possibilities. And so, our goal is to, we'll meet it with our administrators on Monday and start talking about what that might look like. Again, and we'll get into a little bit more in number 7. It'll be a little bit trickier in some schools than others. It might take a little bit more time to transition to that, but just, I think it's a good opportunity, and we talked about, sustainability, and this is a great way to do it, where we can partner with community businesses as well.
Perfect timing.
Do they have any sort of, people that they could put into the schools, sort of manpower until we get our feet under us as far as making sure that the right things are going in?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
think it's gonna fall on.
On us.
Yeah, and I think, so part of that is every building has a recycling team in their budget. There's a stipend for a recycling team. And
Yes.
so we need to bring that back.
Yep.
And so, the high school's in the process of creating their green team. And so that, there's some passion there. And so let's activate that.
Yep.
And part of that is educating kids around that, And so elementary schools, probably a little bit easier. The kids are a little bit more compliant. You could have a custodian by the trash can and say, look, paper products here. you know, don't throw the silverware away and, you know, put your food in here. You know, at the middle school and high school, it's gonna be a little bit bigger task, and that's, I think, it's gonna be really important to kind of get a systematic way to do that. And so that structure, Heather, you mentioned, is gonna be critical as we start to build this. And that's gonna be what's gonna take a little bit of time.
Yep.
So,
Okay, great. Cool.
but I think that's the direction that
Yes.
educationally makes sense, but also from, you know, a financial standpoint makes sense. So this seems like to be a win-win for everybody.
Yep, yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
The one issue that we did discuss is that we would need to have multiple pickups during the week. We were worried about rodents, you know, keeping the food, so we're just making sure that, you know, Friday has to be a pickup because we just can't have that stuff sitting on site overnight or over the weekend. And so they were very willing to do that and kind of get on a regular schedule with us, and then also talked about how that would look in the summertime when we have some summer programs going on as well, so. Okay.
Great.
Perfect. I just wanted to share that we were able to apply for and were granted some additional subsidy for locally grown produce and products in Maine for our food service department. And so we're looking at different ways that we can do that. There's some pretty strict criteria about what a local product is, and it has to be from Maine. But we're looking into that right now. One of the areas that we really, as we've kind of dove into this, that we feel very strongly about is the quality of milk. And so if we look at a higher quality of milk, that does qualify for that additional fund, so we might be able to do that really at no additional cost to the district through this grant. So, you know, that's really good news, so just want to make you aware of that. I did include in your packet kind of the list of the upcoming budget calendars of just kind of what's happening as we go forward. I just didn't know if there's any questions about that. Obviously, March 2nd will be kind of the initial presentation. Our board workshops will begin on the 16th. And then that's going to throw off the finance and facilities timing a little bit. Not that that hasn't happened already this year, but we'll figure that out. April 6th, we have the board workshops, 27th, the board workshop. And then it gives us the opportunity to be able to, the 27th is going to be really designed, if there's more information that you want to have at that time, we can do that. So that's the plan going as we go approach budget season. In each, you know, the high school, middle school, and athletics typically will come on one day. Special education, transportation, facilities will come on another day. The elementary schools will come on another day, and that's typically how we hold those meetings.
And as of right now, it looks as though we will be able to have a live district budget meeting here in the auditorium, assuming that COVID doesn't go wild again. We haven't in 2 years.
Yes, 100%.
We haven't in 2 years.
And that's the, that comes under number 7 also. So I think that transition we're going to have to start to go through a little bit, you know, and so we can talk about that in a minute.
If I can just jump in and invite my fellow board members, because I do this every year, I forget to mark my calendar with all of these dates immediately, and then 2 weeks later, I'm wondering when it is. So I would encourage you all to mark your calendars.
For sure.
Any questions about the budget calendars at all?
Looks good.
Okay. This is a draft, this is like the first draft of a potential school calendar for next year. Our process is that we need to really kind of coordinate with the SRTC, the Sanfield Technical Vocational Center, and then we also want to be good partners with the QEA to give them an opportunity to look at the calendar. If they have any concerns, we can have those discussions, and I would bring it back to you for a final vote. Calendar kind of falls funny again. And so just, you know, looking at that, one of the things that we really wanted to try to keep in mind was that there was some really strong feedback, particularly from the elementary schools, of having those 2 days prior to the start of school. That was really valuable, particularly bringing in kids and being able to do some pre-assessments for the pre-K kindergarten kids, and that was really valuable. And so something that we asked to kind of keep going forward, and we'll begin to work on that a little bit more, and we'll get some feedback on that. But certainly if there's any feedback that you want to provide for me, let me know. This kind of starts the conversation for us. I know I say it 100 times, but remember, the SRTC piece is tricky because we can only have a certain number of days that are out of sync with other districts. And so, unfortunately, we run into some trouble sometimes that some districts have negotiated certain days off in their contract, and so there sometimes can be conflicts. And so, you know, it's really, for us, it's really about coordinating with Sanford to find out what they're doing before we have those bigger conversations so we know where we're at. So. Okay? Teacher days don't really count towards that. It's really just the student days. We are working on this. It makes no sense, but if we didn't, let's just say we started school a day later than Sanford. Logically, you would say that if we sent our students to Sanford that day and still started, that the kids went to school, it wouldn't count against us. But the state still counts that day as out of sync, even though we would send our students. So that's something that we're trying to get some clarity on to see if we can have some flexibility with that, because it's kind of counterintuitive, but that's something that we're working on, just so everybody is aware of that, to try to kind of help ease out the scheduling of 7 different schools, which is tricky. So, okay. Number 7. So I think the positive news is that we have started to see a decline in the daily numbers, and that's really good news. You know, we were floating around that 14%, absenteeism rate, and we seem to be now under that 10% on a regular basis. So that's great news. I know there's been some studies saying that they are seeing some decline, and there may be some feeling that things have kind of crested. We'll still stay close to the dial as far as where we are, but we've kept our protocols in place. That being said, when the SOP changed I think it was January 11th, they removed the contact tracing piece altogether. And they said, if you are a universally masking school, you do not need to contact trace anymore. And so from a management standpoint for schools, contact tracing is a heavy, heavy burden. So to have that removed, there's a great deal of relief, and it creates some more flexibility for us. And so what that basically means is that if you're in a classroom and someone next to you has COVID-19, you don't have to miss school because you're masked. And so that's really an important thing, because there was hours and hours, as I've shared with you before, of kind of going through these incredible lists as we did this. But at that time, I made a decision, for better or for worse, I made the decision, is that I said, look, as I said to you before, the timing of the plan wasn't great. I think the plan is the right place where we want to be going forward, but at that time, things were on a steady rise. And so there was really concern about a high number of cases. And so as you remember, literally 2 weeks ago, we were talking about trying to keep schools open.
Yep.
And so the decision was, let's keep our structures in place in the short term. We knew that we could loosen things up, but we wanted to wait till the numbers seemed to crest. One of the things that was really, and I've shared it with you also, was concerning to me, is that I wanted to ensure that all 3 of our elementary schools and secondary schools had the same rules. And one of those areas that was really a sticking point was how recess was managed.
Yep.
And it's not about, this principal wants it this way or this principal wants it that way. There's some structural issues around the space that you have, supervision you can provide at lunchtime, how many kids you can have at recess. Like there's a lot of other factors that go into that. And so we gave some time for things to kind of, calm down, and then we said, okay, starting Monday, the 31st, we were going to say that it was masks optional at recess. And so that's a big shift. I will say, even with us going to masks optional, I'm speaking to a few of the principals, kids are still wearing masks. And again, part of it might be because it was 10 degrees outside, right? But still, kids were wearing masks. The bigger shift was we went to saying you do not need to cohort at recess time. And so what it basically meant before was that you had to wear masks and you had to cohort. So you had to stay with your class basically all day. You ate lunch with them, you had math with them, you went to recess with them, you were with those same people all the time. And so if your buddy was over in this other classroom, you really couldn't interact with them at school. And so that was concerning for us all. And so we took away the cohorting and said at recess time there is no cohorting anymore, because there is no contact tracing, so there's no reason that we need to keep those kids together, particularly when we're outdoors. And so that was a huge shift. Be mindful that shift may, as logical as it may seem to some, other people had really big concerns about it, because they feel like there's another layer of protection that we're removing. On top of that, the CDC changed the rules around quarantine periods for someone who was COVID-19 positive. And so it went from a 10-day quarantine to a 5-day quarantine, and you could return if you had symptoms that were reducing, that were going away. And so that was a huge shift. We've talked about this before, and I intentionally wrote this in my letter this way. Like, I am not comfortable with that idea. That doesn't feel right to me. It feels like I think I shared it just doesn't make any sense. But those are the rules, and we can't ignore the rules. That's, we are told that you need to follow this. As parts of the SOP that we can alter based on what we do. For instance, masking, there's a different set of rules for masking than there isn't if you didn't mask. But that 5-day quarantine was something that people were really concerned about. And so when I wrote my letter to the community, what I said was, look, this could put your child in a very uncomfortable situation. They have to mask outdoors. So hypothetically, every kid could have their mask off outdoors and kids could have their masks and they'd have to wear their masks. That hasn't happened because kids are still wearing their masks, which I think is an important point, but that's an issue.
Yep.
In addition, they have to be 6 feet apart in the lunchroom. And they can eat with other peers, but like that, those are really two big things. And the last thing a school ever wants to do is single out children. That's the last thing that we want to do. And so that's why when I put the letter out, I said, look, if you would like to keep your children home for the additional 5 days, we would excuse those absences. And that really gives parents a choice. And it's a tough choice. I certainly understand that. But we can't just say we're going to ignore what the CDC tells us to do. So that's created some concern around what we've done, but I think we're moving in the right direction. I think everybody that I've spoken to understands the social emotional work that we're trying to do. So that's where we are today. So now we start to think about what do next steps look like. You know, at some point we need to start to migrate away from the structures that we have in place. And so one of those areas that I've got some feedback from community members, I've got feedback from board members, where we're in different places is lunchtime. So we need to start having conversations about how do we change what lunchtime looks like. And so lunchtime at Central School might mean that kids have the opportunity to go eat lunch outside. And so there's a little bit more freedom that kids go outside and eat lunch. Whereas Elliott Elementary School, they may go to the classroom and eat lunch. At Marshwood High School, they might go into the cafeteria and have 150 desks all facing the same direction, spaced out, and eating lunch in that environment. And so what do we do to be able to start to think about that? And so the 3 big ideas of this is that, first of all, why would we need to make changes? It's because we want to put kids in the social emotional welfare first. It's important. Jerry shared with me on Monday that when he shared with his kids on Friday afternoon that they were going to get rid of cohorting, there was a cheer in the room because they were so excited about that. And so, first of all, we want to do that for kids. So, I would like to see us moving away from going into Marshwood High School gymnasium and having 150 kids in the same assigned seat every single day, in rows, because that's what we've had to do. That would be ideal to start moving away from that. But I'm also mindful that can't happen overnight. And so there's routines, there's things that we have to do in stages to be able to make those things happen. My hope is that if we continue to see the numbers lowering, that when we come back from February vacation, we can start to get those structures in place to start to create some more freedom for students while they're in school. At the same time, we've got to balance the health and safety of people. So I don't see, my intent isn't to say, hey, February 28th, where everyone's going to sit shoulder to shoulder, we're all going to eat lunch in lunchroom together. That's not realistic. But I think we need to start training routines around kids to be able to provide some nutrition. So the 3 reasons I put down were kids and social emotional welfare. I think as a result of our COVID practices, I think we're limiting kids' healthy options at mealtime. And so, John, why would you say that? Well, it's very different that when you go into a cafeteria where you have a line where you can go through and you can choose things, and people use the term kids eat with their eyes, and so they don't have the opportunity to say, I like to try something. So they kind of have to make a choice, and it's a limited choice, and they get that bagged lunch. And look, it was the best thing that we can do, and I am proud of the work that we did around COVID, but there's stuff that I think we need to start to think about a little bit. And so starting to have some options where I don't want to order peas, because if I order peas, they get bagged at 8 o'clock in the morning, lunch is until 12:15, and by the time they get the souffle cup full of peas, it's mush, right? And so the kids go, I don't want to handle that, so we need to find a way to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. At Marshwood High School, you have this equitability issue where we had to kind of spread kids in 2 different areas. So we have the cafeteria, and then we have the gymnasium. But it wouldn't be fair to say, hey, look, the kids in the cafeteria have all these wonderful options because we have the facility downstairs, but the kids upstairs don't get that. And so what we had to do is we really had to take away choices from the downstairs, which is really what we didn't want to do. And so we have to find a way to start to get away from that. Another example at the high school is that we didn't allow kids to eat at the upstairs station in the morning. They had to go downstairs. And if you've been here in the morning, the front doors it's a hop in place. That's where people tend to come in. It's not necessarily the side doors. So those are some things that we need to do. So my hope is that when I come back and meet with you in 2 weeks, there may be some minor tweaks that we want to add to the SOP. And right now the SOP kind of tells us how we eat lunch and what we have to do. There would be some changes that we would have to make. And so At the same time, we have to remember that people are in different places, and there are some people, again, who are very, very concerned to where we are and are going to be very uncomfortable, and we have to be able to make sure those voices are heard and make a logical transition that's slow. I had a great conversation with Dr. Harrison this morning, and even the idea of, at Elliott Elementary School, we have the lunch ladies, carrying, bags up to the 3rd floor to deliver the lunches. And so even if we wanted to have kids to start to come down to the cafeteria to get their lunches, you have to teach 1st graders, 2nd graders, 3rd graders those protocols and procedures to do that. It doesn't happen like that. It takes some time. And so we're going to start to have those conversations. It's going to be building based. We're going to start with our staff. But I did want to make you aware of kind of where my mind is right now. At the same time, we need to keep kids safe. If the numbers start to spike again, that's a whole other issue. But I think, as we start to kind of work our way out of this pandemic, I think we have to start thinking about what life's going to look like going forward and need to have those conversations. So, any questions or comments?
No, I think it's very reasonable and well thought out, and I think I would agree. It's time to start thinking forward.
Right.
Trevor, what do you think? You eat lunch at the high. It's a very different atmosphere than it was 3 years ago.
So I really like the idea of mixing the gymnasium and cafeteria lunches, because I have some of my friends in the gymnasium while I'm in the cafeteria, so that'd be really, really good for me. But especially on the food, especially in the high school, I don't really have that because I eat there's the same options every day. So after you try it the first time, you kind of get that same kind of you don't really need to try it out.
Yep.
So I think definitely the gymnasium and cafeteria options definitely in my opinion, is the front runner compared to the food.
Yeah, and so at the high school, what would be and this is a conversation that they need to have as a school, but for me, what would a logical first step be? Well, the logical first step is that the kids who are in the gymnasium stay in the gymnasium for a little bit, but they're allowed to sit where they want to sit, right? That's the first level that we can do. How do we manage that? And then we keep assessing, and as we kind of build that capacity, obviously it would be wonderful to say, hey, the cafeteria is open. I just don't know mathematically. I think you want to keep 3 feet apart between people, right? I think that's probably a wise decision to make. But remember, 3 feet apart is from nose to nose, not shoulder to shoulder. And so what does that look like? And so can we space that out and do the math of how many kids that we can get in there? There's some math problems that we have to do, and how do we address these things? I've also, in the meantime, met with the food service department and said, look, it's time to start transitioning back to scratch cooking again. We need to get away from this processed food. And so one of the issues that with the BioGreen is that a lot of things are in wrappers. And so in order to get rid of the food waste, you're going to have to open up the cheese stick and get rid of the cheese stick. You're going to have to dump out the yogurt container and throw it. It's not just the old days where you kind of scrape your tray and kind of go on to the next thing. There's some physical things that we have to start thinking about as we start to do that. And so as we move away from kind of the reliance on those prepackaged meals, which is, again, that's where we were. It's what we had to do. It made the most sense because it was the safest. We're able to do that. I also had the conversation with them today to say, who's making the rules around what food service can do and what they can't do? And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, does the Maine Department of Education Food Service Department, do they tell us that you're not allowed to have a salad bar? You're not allowed to do this. And I'm not saying we're having a salad bar tomorrow, but I'm using that as a simple example. And they said, I don't know. So what happens is that our individual buildings making those decisions, and we start to splinter off that we're all doing different things. And so really I want to start with, what rules do we have to follow from a food service perspective? Is it a health inspector that tells us we can't do certain things? And then once we have those rules, let's customize what we're doing in each one of the buildings. And so really trying to have those really tough conversations, what's the minimum? Then we can make the decision, and then we can figure out how it impacts kids. And we've got to keep kids at the center of that decision. What's the best thing for them? It breaks my heart to walk in and see, kids, at the lunchroom. It's just different. It feels more institutional than it does like a school at times. And I think we need to start, and that's where we had to be. Don't misunderstand me. I think we did the right thing, but I think we need to start thinking about what it looks like going forward. So. And it won't happen overnight, but we're going to be working on it. So my goal is as I said, the 28th of February to start having some of those simple steps in place. The buildings will start meeting about it, and I'll bring back some recommendations around the SOP language. I will be meeting with the district nurses to be able to get their feedback as well from a safety perspective, just to make sure we're all set. I did have a conversation with Judy Doran. I think Judy felt good about the fact that we were going to give it a little bit of time, but she really feels like if we get over this hump that we feel like that we may have just, knock on wood, may have jumped over, there are some things that we can start to do to loosen things up. Questions? Thank you for that. You're welcome. So as you know, we met with our representatives, local representatives, 2 weeks ago, and the conversation around a vaccination clinic came up. And lo and behold, when Representative Myers left, I had an email when I got to school the next day saying, hey, we're ready to do a vaccination clinic. So we found dates. We did the dates at the middle school. On Monday, the 31st, I think we did 105 vaccinations. And so we offered all vaccinations and also a booster. And we'll also have a follow-up clinic in, it has to be 4 weeks because of the following of February vacation, but in 4 weeks for the second round of the immunizations, or I should say vaccinations,
Yep.
then. So it was really good.
That's great.
Any questions? Okay, and then just some school events, just trying to, keep in mind some of the important things that we're doing and some of the things that kind of go beyond the math and science. Elliott Elementary School has the Great Kindness Challenge the week of January 24th. And I guess it was wearing clothes backwards, which sounds exciting. Central School, we had the 17th annual 100th Day of Giving starts on the 24th and runs through February 20th. And so that's just one of the things that Central School has done for a long time. And then also Junk to Funk is coming at the end of March, which is a musical presentation. Marshwood Great Works School recently held the Purple and White Spirit Day. They had the Civil Rights Team Kickoff Project, and then the tobogganing fundraiser continues. And then Marshwood Middle School, they are holding a Susicle, and that is going to be held here at the high school. And so one of the issues at the middle school that we have is that we have to use every bit of available space in the cafeteria and on the stage to be able to fit everybody in there with the proper spacing. And so we had to move, rather than try to move those desks every day, we moved the production to here for this year. So Susicle will happen in February. And then we are Marshwood Hawk Block activity celebrating the many faces of Marshwood, and the advisories are creating collages that include individual images combined with things that could represent the community. So just some things kind of going on at each one of our schools. That's cool. Student report.
Okay, so student government is currently in the brainstorming phase of another Hawk Block. Some ideas include the field day, dance party, and mental health coping skills. We're also evaluating the information we got from our last Hawk Block, and we're kind of working on a response to certain aspects of it. Definitely stuff found in just kind of like, we asked some students kind of like what their response was and how they kind of like highlighted like the second option to the Hawk Block compared to just sitting in advisories. On the topic of sports, we saw boys basketball play at Bonnie Eagle last night. They unfortunately lost 59-50. They moved to a record of 9-5. Girls basketball, on the other hand, had an overtime thriller and won 61-57. They moved to a record of 5-8 and have won 4 of the last 5. Ski team has a race tonight at Shawnee Peak. And lastly, the hockey team has a game tonight at 6:30 against Kennebunk. They also lost last night against Scarborough 6-2 and moved to a record of 4-7-1.
Alrighty, on the other side of things, the SAT signups just ended today, and the test will be in March. Hawk Block today and last week, as Mr. Caverly said, was celebrating the identities of Marshwood High School students. Last week's was very entertaining. I've heard from multiple advisories that it was a very heavy participation compared to some of the other activities we've done, and it has been a great opportunity for kids to express themselves. Civil Rights is planning a presentation on microaggressions. We do not know if we're going to be doing a Hawk Block surrounding it, but we will be putting some things up in regards to that topic. Freshmen are currently doing a class fundraiser that includes recycling. They've put clink bags in every classroom, and they'll be using the money to add to their class. And video production students, advanced video production students, are working on a film festival right now, contributing to one that revolves around mental health and healthy ways that students have been coping with trauma and negativity. I am also entering into it, which is very entertaining and fun.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Thank you. The next section of our agenda is the correspondence section. I do want to mention that the board received an email from a concerned parent in Elliott today addressing very much the concerns that you talked about in your COVID-19 update report around kids having to wear masks when they're in that 6 to 10 days of the isolation period.
Yes.
And that input was much appreciated. Thank you. Next is the report of the committees. Finance and Facilities will next meet on February 16th, which is 2 weeks from now, so we have no report from them tonight. Ed Policy did meet on January 26th, and is someone going to give us a report on that?
I can.
Please, thank you.
So we have 2 policies coming for first readings tonight. The first being JLCC, which is communicable and infectious diseases. That's just an update to our policy with more detailed language as far as the return to school period, and clarifying some language around quarantine. And then the other one that we're bringing is JFAA, admission of resident students. We're adding a reference to tuition students there. And then we discussed a few others that we're getting more clarification on and tabling till we have that clarification. Also, Jeremy Poole is going to be working on the website to continue to make the search process for the policies much more efficient. So that's in the works. And Charlotte Bates is got back to us with a long list of those policies. Remember how we talked about she was looking to see what policies we needed to review and prioritize those. So she got back to us with a long list of those, so that was helpful.
Excellent.
And I think that's it.
Thank you. Wellness SEL Committee met earlier this evening. Do we have someone who can report on that?
Oh, you know what? Can I add one thing? Sorry. Can I add? We did talk about the boosters policy quite a bit, and there will be a subcommittee formed to look at bylaws and how all the boosters are budgeted and everything, just FYI.
We
Sorry.
actually met today.
Oh, perfect.
And we'll be bringing up the points from that next time.
Great.
Great, thank you.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
That's all right, thank you. So Wellness SEL?
Okay, Jen, I missed the beginning.
I took notes. Yep, I can go ahead and chime in if you want.
Okay.
Okay, so we met tonight, and this meeting we had Sarah Patterson from Chartwell's, the dietitian at Chartwell's, and Karen, the new, I'm going to get her title wrong, Food
Service Director.
Service Director.
Karen Fitz.
And she was at the meeting tonight. So that was nice to have them and sort of get their input. Karen talked quite a bit about the efforts to reduce, reuse, and recycle waste, and she's sort of taking an assessment of that. She talked about composting the food waste, moving away from some of the packaging, same thing that we talked about, is we can move away from some of those COVID protocols. That will help with all the packaging that we're having to do. And then Sarah from Chartwell's offered to help sort of organize some student involvement and head up some student involvement for reducing waste as well. She said she would be interested in helping us with that if we needed. Also, we're getting a social worker from Sweetser that will split time between Central and Great Works, and that will be a full-time position. And there's a huge need for that, so that will be great to have. We talked a bit about potentially bringing the Hawk mentoring program back, and so that was a mentoring between the high school and the elementary schools. So high school students would mentor some sort of students who might not have like necessarily identifiable supports, but so could just sort of benefit from like a mentor situation. So we're going to sort of have some more discussion about how to revive that program, hopefully for the remainder of the year if we can. And then touched on, from the school counseling aspect, there was some new information that came out about some new self-care program for staff. We just talked briefly about that. We'll do some more looking into that. Anything else that I missed?
I think you got everything that I heard.
Okay.
I was a little late, so you got more than I heard, actually, so.
Great, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Lastly, the advisory committee that has been working on the portion of the website that deals with the board. That is about probably one meeting and a little bit of work away from completing its work, and I suspect we'll get to that sometime in the next week or two. Okay, well, so perhaps we'll have a report out on that in our next meeting. Okay, great, thank you. That concludes the report of the committees and brings us to new business. May I have a motion, please, to approve that first reading?
I move to approve the first reading and discussion of policy JLCC, communicable infectious diseases.
I'll second, Kate.
Kate, thank you. Comments or questions? This is largely language updates, you said?
Yep, some more detail on the return to school period and the language around the quarantine.
And just the changing like from the local health department to the CDC,
Right,
things like that.
got it. Okay, any other questions or comments? All in favor? That's 5-0, thank you. Now I'll be back for
We were
second.
all very well informed when we did this policy. This was not a hard one to do.
Yeah.
We were very familiar with
Yep.
Yeah.
Having put it to practice.
And
over
again,
the
this
past-
is not COVID, this is not
It's not COVID specific.
COVID
No.
specific,
Yeah,
yes.
right. Great. Can I have a motion, please, to approve the other first reading?
I'll move to approve the first reading and discussion of policy JFAA, admission of resident students.
Second, Heather?
Thank you, Heather. Comments or questions?
That was a minor change.
And the version I'm looking at has really just a strikeout.
Yeah. Looks like.
And this is a really important policy. There's some language in here that's critical for us.
Yeah.
And really, it's about, residence shall mean that where a parent makes a home. And it's because that's always an issue when we have residency issues, is that I own property in Elliott but I'm living in Dover. And so where you live is where you create the home. Just because you own property in South Berwick or Elliott does not necessarily mean that you get to go to our schools. That's not how the law reads. And so,
No, that language isn't changing in this revision.
no, it's very
No,
critical
it's-
language,
it's
though.
important
Very
to point
critical.
that out,
That's the
absolutely,
focal
absolutely.
point of the policy.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
Were we gonna add the cross-reference to tuition students?
Yes, there should be some, no, yep, we'll add that. Perfect.
Got it. Okay. All in favor? That is 5-0. Thank you very much. Can I have a motion, please, regarding this execution of an agreement?
I move we approve the chairperson of the board to execute an agreement as discussed in the executive session for possible resolution to a well claim at Marshwood Middle School.
Second, Heather?
Thank you, Heather.
If I may?
Yeah, please.
So, we were notified that we have 3 neighbors across the street from Marshwood Middle School who are having some issues with their wells. And so we're trying to partner with the Department of Transportation to come up with some solutions that might work for them. And so this is really working on creating an agreement with the Department of Transportation to come on our property and drill a test well. And so really just to be able to see if the water quality is better where we are, what the flow rate is, and then to see if it might help be a solution for those 3 families across the street. So this is just for the test well. This is not for a permanent structure at this point in time. That may come down the road. We'll see how the test comes up, but this really gives the ability for us to allow the lawyer to go back and forth with the Department of Transportation to come up with a plan. And then once we have that plan, that negotiations is done, we can then approve, that which they hope to be able to do during February vacation when school's out of session.
Any questions or comments? All in favor? That is 5-0. Thank you very much. Last item of new business with regard to a request for an overnight
Yeah.
trip. This is quite awesome.
This
actually.
this was a tough one, so, well, yeah.
Ah,
It's nice in a way to see them come.
It
come
is.
into town,
We haven't
right?
seen one of these in a while, so.
Yeah,
great.
May I have the motion, please?
Yeah, I move to approve the Marshwood High School request for overnight trip for the ski team for Class A state championships occurring February 17th through 18th, 2022 at Black Mountain in Rumford. Overnight expenses will be covered by the boosters.
I'll second, Jen.
Jen, thank you.
So this took a little bit of processing time.
Sure.
And so part of you says, oh my gosh, we're in the middle of a pandemic, how do we have kids go away and spend time, away from, home, so to speak. And what we went to is we went back to kind of what we've all said all along. Let's go back, let's look at the medical side of this, let's look at the safety component of this. And so Mr. Buzzell did a great job, Rich Luciano did a great job, and then they met with Tani, the high school nurse, and really the sentiment from Tani was that, we are better off from a safety standpoint to be able to socially distance, overnight, in an appropriate setting, than put those kids on the bus for another 8 hours. And so really, from a safety standpoint, we're better off to do this. Obviously, there'll be adequate supervision for the trip. This is kind of a step kind of going back into a new direction that we haven't been in quite some time. So that, we did do spend a little bit more time on this. That's why it came a little bit late to you, just to, and I apologize for that, but we wanted to make sure that we had the details squared away before we brought it forward to all of you. So in some ways it's great, in some ways I think in all ways it's great, to be totally honest with you.
It's great.
But it's another, for me, this is another step, that I think, we're starting to try to think about, how do we think about things a little bit differently, so.
And just as getting transported to and from school, they'll be riding the bus up to the mountain, or up to the accommodations, masked.
Mass, that's correct. Yep.
I think it's great.
So, and you know what, the other thing is that it's also something the kids look forward to. This,
Sure.
Yes.
and this is, and that's also part, and they've had a great start to their season, so.
It's awesome.
And we want to give them time to be able to get the reservations in order, so that's why we wanted to put it on.
It's great.
Comments or questions from the board?
I think it's awesome.
All in favor? 5-0.
Okay, that's good news.
Great. So that moves us to completes, I should say, the new business, and moves us to the building administrator check-in. We have Central Elementary, Elliott Elementary, and Marshwood Great Works School. Who wants to go first?
Hi, thank you. Just wanted to piggyback on what Heather asked about the systems. Wanted to thank Mrs. Dunn's third grade class, because this year at Central, we really felt like we wanted to get up our recycling. And so every Wednesday, Mrs. Dunn's class goes around to all the classrooms and takes all the paper recycling, and there's no special day, and it's really exciting and fun to watch. So thank you to Mrs. Dunn's class. And I just again want to, I feel like I do this all the time, but thank our PTO. They've just been so wonderful, and they've been doing things like our art teacher this year, Mrs. Stewart, has been starting Artsonia, which I know some of the other schools use, but in an elementary school when there's 370 kids, that she makes sure every child has their art on an online platform so that all the parents can, you could order t-shirts and order prints, and it's really fun. I looked at my son who's a junior. He has his from Great Work, you can see from a long time ago. So it's a neat online portfolio, but it's a big undertaking because Brenda wants to make sure that every single person has at least two, so every week, our PTO comes and does a little, they set up a art studio in the hallway where they take pictures of all the art to upload. So that's our PTO volunteers, and they've been giving us monthly treats. We had sweet and salty the other day, and it sounds silly, but our most exciting thing is when they come and spruce up our bathrooms and give us nice little toiletries in our bathrooms. So they do that for us. And again, they're sponsoring the Junk to Funk, which will be a 10-day residency, which is, we've missed out on a lot of assemblies, a lot of different things. So these kids our whole school is going to get to have 2 days with Junk to Funk and with a real assembly. So we're super excited. And then we're also, the PTO sponsoring an artist in residency, where in the end of May, we'll have an artist come and do a mandala creation out on the bricks on the outside. So just really exciting things. The PTO is helping us get back, like you're talking about, getting back to normal and giving our kids some neat experiences. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So John talked a little bit about our recess, and I talked about this at the Wellness Committee this evening. So when we, at the Great Work School for the last, for year and a half, whatever, the kids have been in those cohorts at recess. And so on, I think it was Thursday, I went into each lunch. So there's about 60, 65, 70 kids in that lunch, and started to say, we're going to make a switch starting next week, starting on Monday. you know, and so the kids could see the way the direction that the conversation was going. And I don't know if you know Donna Began. Donna works in our cafeteria. She used to work here at the high school. She told me afterwards she was bawling, she was crying, because the kids were just coming out of their seats. Because, like, you know, do you mean it, Mr. Burnell? Do you mean it? Are we going to be able to play with our other friends? And it was just, it was unbelievable. Now, I have to say that our discipline has kind of gone up a little bit because, you know, playing with it, but we're just letting that fly a little bit. So it's really heartwarming to see that. John talked about the company that talked about getting the food waste. And so I've talked to two of the groups today in the cafeteria and we talked about food going into a landfill or going into a product. And I said, can we do this? And the kids are like, yes, Mr. Bell. I said, we know we can find a bucket to throw food in and one bucket to throw paper in. They said, it's not that difficult, Mr. Bernal. So our kids are already on. So I'm hoping that, John, that we're one of the schools that would go forward with this. Nina talked about the PTO. We really haven't had a PTO the last couple of years just because of COVID. We haven't done that, but we've reinstituted that. And so they're helping us with this great toboggan race. And we steal things from the elementary schools. And so both Elliott and Central do the, I don't know, what's the race for education or Monster Mile? Well, we're doing the Great Toboggan Race. So it is a fundraiser. But next Friday, we've got classes going against classes. So all day, we are going to be racing down the hill. So we don't want too much rain here coming up in this next snowstorm. We need to have the snow. So, but we really appreciate the PTO with that. We've got, the other day, I was telling at the wellness, we had campfires on the playground. And we just had s'mores, where we brought the kids out and we said, we're just gonna cook s'mores. Again, something different, something fun. Doesn't help their math skills, however, there were smiles on the faces of kids. Our musical started today. We've had tryouts for the musical. We're gonna have a live performance this year, and so the first day for the play was today. We've got 49 kids, I think, signed up for the Civil Rights. Their first meeting was tonight, and so they had a virtual meeting tonight. So just a lot of great things happening at the Great Works School, as with all the other schools. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Jerry reassured me that they got fire permits. Just kidding. Thanks for the opportunity to celebrate some of the things that are going on at Elliott Elementary School. I would share with you, as you know, we were sticklers with masks and the social distancing and the cohorting. We lifted that on Monday to great cheers from kids and staff. Kids had a ball outside. I went out, played with them at different times. They were enjoying each other. They were enjoying friends that they hadn't seen in quite some time outside. It was a good experience, and we're happy we made that transition. Just a couple of things. Jake Nesbitt is a third grade teacher at Elliott Elementary School, and he is the advisor for our civil rights team. And Jake has just recently been certified through an orientation that he went through with other civil rights teachers or leaders from other schools in the state of Maine. So we're really proud of that. Some of the work that they did was they drafted a blueprint that would be opened for referencing for the various schools that participated in the work. Some of the work that we're already doing at Elliott Elementary School was shared during the training with Jake. Some of the interesting things that we're doing, we're having students read books about civil rights experiences or examples, and they read the book and they record it, and then they share it with their peers in other grade levels. And they've also provided writing prompts to go along with that. It's really exciting work. If you get a chance to view the video, it's just precious. Some of the works, the level of seriousness they take when they do that work. So that's been terrific. Some of the stories I'll just share that Jake shared with me, stories about young athletes overcoming disabilities to pursue their dreams. An article was shared with inspiring facts about Martin Luther King. A student read that and then wrote a prompt that the other students responded to. Stories about kids from different Native American nations who are keeping their history alive. So really important lessons, particularly in this day and age. I'd also mention Kindness Week. A lot of schools participate in Kindness Week. Elliott Elementary School, it's a world-recognized Great Kindness Challenge that we participated in last week. Over 100 counties, 17 million students, and 33,000 schools participated in the Kindness Challenge. That's good news for us, for our society, without a doubt. Elliott is always striving to create a caring community. The event allows us to focus on kindness in all facets of our day as a whole school. Third grade students read quotes focusing on kindness during the morning announcements and challenged the school to simple acts of kindness, including reading to a sibling, saying thank you to a bus driver, or inviting a friend that you hadn't seen in quite a while to play outside. I thought that was really nice. I would just credit Bess Kiernan. She's the driving force at Elliott Elementary School around kindness and the celebration of that. And I think it's woven in our fabric there. That's good news. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Any other comments or observations from the board before we adjourn? In which case, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn this meeting.
Second, Heather.
Heather, thank you. All in favor? That is 5-0. We are adjourned.